you very much, Sheila. Dear Sheila, also send best regards to Caslin. Thank you to Caslin and to all the friends of the Achill Heinrich Böll Association. Lieber Botschafter David Gill, lieber René Böll, dear ladies and gentlemen, all friends of this weekend, which is a really exciting experience already now for me, and I'm very happy to be part of it and here for the second time now, after I was visiting the island and the cottage and meeting the associations together with René 2.5 years ago. And I said, I have to come back, and I'm very happy that I've been invited tonight and to talk to you on the current state of the political situation in which we are. And I think that it is the right moment to give such a keynote here in this environment, as this is obviously an interesting and a marking moment in history when we look at the political landscape. And for me, as one of the co-presidents of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, it's an honor to speak here in front of you and to be here at a place where David Gill already mentioned Heinrich Böll played such an important role, but also found so much inspiration for his work, which in the end also inspired the foundation of our Stiftung, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, and also is leading us till today when we look at how do we act in society, getting people into political education but also political activism. That's what we are founded for as one of the 6 political foundations in Germany, which is some kind of a unicorn in a global environment of political education, because after the war in Germany, political leaders, but also the Americans who tried to build up democracy in Germany, decided to create bodies for political education and also political thinking and political activism, which are independent from the governmental organizations and which don't follow a centralized thinking of education on political issues, but which follow this from a perspective of political thinking, thinking of political party families at least, or long-standing political traditions like conservatism, socialism, liberalism, or also the green political thinking, which the Heinrich Böll Foundation was built on after the German Greens were founded by Petra Kelly and other political activists, and made it into the parliaments not only in Germany but in many parts of Europe and also globally now. And looking at the current situation, being here on Achill Island, it's also maybe an interesting moment, because David Gill was just referencing that this is like where Europe ends, maybe, but for the history of modern Europe, of the European Union at least, we were always looking beyond that towards the US and towards a transatlantic partnership, which in these times look completely different than all the decades before. Also, when political actors like Petra Kelly were in party politics or in parliaments, or were thinkers and literates like Heinrich Böll were active, that was a complete different time. Nonetheless, of course, many of these struggles are the same today. And when we look at Petra Kelly and Heinrich Böll, for example, already back then, they were looking at the individuals in the struggle for political impact on all sides of the geopolitical landscape. Heinrich Böll was fighting also as a president of PEN for the rights of journalists and writers, not only in the communist bloc, where he was fighting very hard for liberation of imprisoned writers, for example, but he was also doing the same in America. And he did that with the understanding that it is a struggle of individuals and societies all around the globe. It's a global question. And I think that's also an interesting scheme which you put to this weekend when you look at the global fight for peace and also nature and ecological preservation. Then these are fights and struggles which are global in the same way today. But looking at the current political landscape, as I mentioned, in a time where so much changes dramatically what we were used to over decades, we have to look from different perspectives also, from new perspectives. And one is to maybe not turn our backs to America, but turn towards Europe more when we stand here, for example, in Achill, but also in other parts of Europe. When we look towards who are our partners today, then this is the time where we have a historical responsibility also to look for preserving, for example, what Europe foundations are about. That the values of Europe, which were arising from historical experiences over a long history of wars and conflict on this continent, the values which also were brought forward in many struggles afterwards and still are struggling issues. When we look at various places in Europe, there is a struggle for political values, for fundamental values of what Europe's meant to be. But also, when we look into a global situation in which, for example, not only a US administration is turning its back to partners like to Europe, but also to values as European values, but also is turning its back to a rules-based international order, an institutionalized international community, which is so important when we are talking about preserving peace, for example. And it is obvious that this is a moment where we also need to remember that it always needs someone who's standing for these institutions. And for the moment, obviously, the need for Europe to stand for the rules-based order and the international institutions is a very important moment. A moment in time in which we can say, if we don't stand up for these institutions to be safeguarded and to be followed closely when we look at conflicts, as Kathleen mentioned, when we look at the lives of individuals in conflicts, we need to stand for these institutions working on these issues and trying to safeguard the values all across the globe. Then Europe needs to stand for that now and needs to stand up for that. But we also see a time, and I think that's important to see, in which there is a weakness of institutions to do that. And there is a weakness also of democracies to deliver for answers for these challenges right now. And this comes because there is a lot of people who didn't see democracies delivering for their challenges in life for the last 1-2 decades. We realize that now, and we understand that democracies need to also deliver for the people, to improve their life conditions, to make sure that they have what they need to also get along with huge changes, with transitions. If you look at the ecological challenges like climate change and the change for industries to adjust to these new environments in market conditions, but also when you look at the transition of digitalization and new technologies coming up, changing our lives, where we live in new public spaces, completely different than before. When David Gill mentions how people learned about Ireland in Germany via the novels of Heinrich Böll, for example, then today the public space and way to learn about new things has completely changed. And we see that not only writing has changed, but the medium, the environment, the space in which we consume or even come across certain information has dramatically changed. And this is obviously a moment where also the question comes up, what is the public space which we want to create, and how do we safeguard a public space founded on openness, on an open society, on values, on fundamental values we need to safeguard. And that's obviously another question which at the moment is very much open, and where it needs the engagement of individuals to create new spaces based on values of equality, of fairness, of openness, and maybe also addressing the fact that the digital environment which we see right now, based on platforms created on advertisement, on algorithms following certain principles only set forward by certain companies, is something we need to change and adjust to our values in order to create a public space in which we can freely communicate and exchange information and perspectives. And that seems to be a time in which it becomes important to have individuals standing up for their interests more than before. As I mentioned, institutions and democratic institutions, also politicians, struggle to get these values and also standards in a digitalized and globalized economy across and safeguarded. And that means that we need to have more engagement of individuals. And that's something where people like Petra Kelly and Heinrich Böll were standing for very clearly over decades. They showed what it means to be, like Petra Kelly, a political activist and one who's not looking at the institutionalized political procedures rather than on political activism and engagement with societies, with people, with individuals, or when it means also to have political citizens like Heinrich Böll, who were looking at our society as one where a democracy lives from the engagement of individuals, lives from the engagement of each and every individual, even though he or she might not be a political activist or political party representative, but is an important part of society, a citizen which can speak up for the challenges and speak up for the needs in society which need to be put to the awareness of other citizens and of the public. And that is something where I see that these lessons or these inspirations from the past can be very current today when we look at our societies right now, where maybe we also got a little bit used to the fact that there are political institutions or political representatives dealing with our problems or with our needs, rather than us ourselves getting active and being engaged ourselves. And I think that this might be also a moment where it is at the same time very easy to get engaged, even on a very high level of political debate, even when it is about huge European or international issues. Because today, different than in the past, and that is a positive note, we have huge technological advantages like artificial intelligence, who can help us to translate communication between languages, or we have technologies like the internet where it is possible to communicate around the globe. Or we have possibilities to also get in touch with each other via wide ranges and in real time. And we could even have extensions of gatherings like this one tonight into the digital environment to reach out to even more people. And that is what gives us the opportunities to deal with the complexity of today's world, which sometimes becomes for many people too complex and too far away, but gives us the opportunity now to re-engage and to maybe also make it a bit smaller than we think. So to bring people together also in a complex and globalized world in which sometimes we don't feel that we can be effective anymore in reaching out to others. But it is possible. And when we look at our work today, for example, as a political foundation, that is where we want and have to deliver also for new formats of how to communicate with each other, how to get together and develop new ideas, to discuss, to also just exchange on a personal level about the needs and emotions in the political situation in which we are. And I think that when looking at the recent years, emotions is something which came too short in the discussions we had. Very often in these moments of crises, one crisis after the other, in a crisis mode, we were discussing things very pragmatically or very much on substantial questions of political decisions rather than on what does it do with us, how do we feel with it. And that leads me to the point that in many parts of the world, also here in Europe, we see that people don't see their emotions anymore to be addressed by political debates and or by also politicians who were addressing very many complex issues rather than really the emotions of people. And I think that today there is a moment where we need to get back also to understand what does it mean when people have fear from the changes which are happening, rather than understanding that change is an opportunity also to create something new, or like David Gill mentioned, to also not only have change but also to shape the change in which we are, to understand how to organize together and be effective in shaping the change when it comes to, for example, economic perspectives which we can build on new developments which can bring us out of the dependency in geopolitical meaning, or out of the dependency on old energy, for example, which is destroying our planet, so that we can safeguard our planet and the nature in which we are living. And that is something where I see that when we deal with these emotions and create new perspectives which are emotionally understandable for people, we can also get along, bring them to political activism and political engagement from whatever position people are in. And I really think that there is a chance to develop a new perspective on creating something new. And to come back to where I started, I think that the perspective of looking towards how we can do this together at this moment in time as Europeans, and how we can create in Europe a stable environment for democratic societies with resilient societies and resilient institutions, that we can get that done when we understand how important it is that we get all the individuals engaged, that we get all the individuals also on a level of being able to engage in political discussions. And that is why political education today is so important, and that is why also examples like Peter Kelly and Heinrich Böll of citizens and people who were doing politics in a way that it can educate others, that it can motivate others, is so important. And that is what I would like to bring towards to you for also this weekend, to get together and get engaged and get other people educated and engaged in political education and in political activism, which is so important today when we look at the challenges of our time. Thank you very much.